Thank you. So, good afternoon and welcome everyone to what I promise will be an informative and enjoyable discussion with these four titans of the marketing industry about the subject of personal brand. My name, as Jordan said, is Joel Barnett. I run a company called Fortune Hill, which is the UK's leading marketing headhunting company. So in short, what we do is help companies make really high quality decisions about which leaders to bring into their businesses to achieve their ambitions. Now, this has all come about in part as a consequence of a book that was produced last year by the marketing community to raise money for the NHS Charities Together COVID-19 appeal. Here is what said book looks like. And our good friends at Sky, which is of course, Europe's leading entertainment company, very kindly bought 1,000 copies of that book for the BYP network. As a consequence of Sky putting us together, we became friends with the awesome team at BYP, and we got really excited about some of the cool stuff that we could do together that might be valuable for the network. And this is one such thing. So we've got a really enjoyable and eventful session lined up for you. I'm going to hand over to the team to introduce themselves so you guys know who it is who's speaking to you. Adrian, perhaps you would you kick us off and just explain who you are.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Adrian Walcott. I'm the MD at Brands with Values. We are disrupting the employee engagement survey market with a culture diagnostic tool called Culture Decoder, which we are using to help organizations drive meaningful and sustainable change. The tool and the consulting we run off the back of it takes us into places like the World Bank, Network Rail, Mediacom, and FA, and so on and so forth. Prior to this journey, I ran the brand for Eurostar across Europe. And prior to that, I was at Barclays for 10, 12 years, working in various marketing roles in private business, corporate, and retail, and started my career at Ogilvy for WPP in Africa, West Africa, Ghana, where I spent 2 amazing years learning my craft. And that happened because when I tried to get into the industry, when I left uni, no one would have me over here. So I had to go abroad and learn my craft.
Sonia, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Sonia. I have mainly been a client-side marketer. So most recently I was marketing director at The Guardian Media Group, but then made a weird decision to go to a management consultancy where I've been for the last 18 months. So I've been at Bain and I work in their marketing consultancy arm there. So that's me.
And this is Bain that only hires the best and the brightest in the world. So
yeah, but you know, occasionally some of us slip through. It's all right.
Kenyatta, over to you.
Hello, Kenyatta Nelson. I am Chief Brand Officer at a business called N Brown up in Manchester. You can tell by my funny accent, I am not British. Grew up in the States, a funny little town called Charlotte, North Carolina. And spent about 16 years at Procter & Gamble, 10 of which in the US, about 6 in Geneva. And then I jumped across to retail to join a business called Shop Direct. Spent several years there, joined Missguided for a year and a bit before joining N Brown. So I like to describe myself as more anthropologist than marketer. I love people. That's why I got into this business. And so I'm really looking forward to a productive and eventful conversation with you guys. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Omar, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Omar. Good to meet everybody who's on the call. Pleasure to be on the panel with these folks as well. I work at Amazon, based in London, looking after the EU. Before that, heading up marketing. Before that, I was at Uber, so looking after Uber Rides, the taxi business, Uber Eats, the food delivery business, and Jump, which is electric bikes and scooters. Before that, a company called Sonos, who do multi-room audio, so wireless speakers, based in the US at their headquarters in Santa Barbara. And before that, Sony. So launching PlayStation 3, doing a load of electronic stuff here, the US, and in Japan. So yeah, good to be here.
Great to have you guys. And listen, I'm absolutely delighted that you've all agreed to be with us this evening. Thank you so much for volunteering your time. Everybody in the audience, make no mistake, these are people who are at the very top of their profession. We all agreed when we said we were going to do this together that if one person takes one useful nugget away from this afternoon session, then it's going to be a really worthwhile investment of time. I suspect, in fact, I have no doubt that a whole lot of people are going to get a whole lot of useful insight and thought-provoking advice from the conversation that we're going to have between us. So we're going to talk about the subject of personal brand. We're going to cover off some things that I'm going to fire off at our panelists and ask them to address for us. That's probably going to take us 20 to 30 minutes, and then we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for all you lovely people to ask us any questions that you would like to ask us. So as we've discussed, this is going to focus on the subject of personal brand, and irrespective of whether you're aware of it or indeed whether you like it or not, every single one amongst us has a personal brand. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into what a personal brand actually is. So what do we mean when we're talking about this concept of a personal brand and designing your own brand to design your future? We're going to talk about why it matters, how you make sure it's a representation of who you really are, and how you define and evolve your brand as your career progresses. We're going to share some advice and insight around aligning your personal passions with your professional endeavors. And we're going to have a chat as well about how to build your network and really raise your profile. So, Sonia, let's start with you. What is a personal brand, and why is it an important consideration in professional life?
Okay, so I've always really hated the expression personal brand. It's always made me feel slightly cringy. So it's great that I'm here today. But what it made me do is look it up and properly research what it is. And so with all good research, I started on Wikipedia. And there's a definition on Wikipedia. Honestly, it's still the best source. There's a definition on Wikipedia, which I slightly bastardized a bit, but I thought it might be useful to start with this. And what it says is personal brand is, what my bastardized version of it says is, personal brand is a widely recognized perception of you based on your experience, skills, actions, and values. So I sort of thought that kind of fitted because it talks about kind of some of the substance that we're going to get into today. And in terms of why it's important, I think basically, like, as you say, like it or not, we have a personal brand. And if we don't put it out there, people are going to draw their own conclusions. So it's about kind of getting there first with something that is that you have defined, rather than other people just jumping to conclusions, which we all probably know can often be wrong. I think it's important because of that, but then also because you can be intentional about it. You can decide what that vision or that perception of you is, and I think that's really important because if you don't kind of choose it based on a version that you like, you can end up with a bit of a dickhead persona that you're stuck with, whether you like it or not. And I think it's really important just to take the time, because I mean, I know I've certainly kind of accidentally fallen into this sort of persona that I don't really like and that isn't really true to me. And so I wish I'd done that Wikipedia search earlier and looked into that definition and maybe been a bit more thoughtful about this and thought about the outward perception that I'd like people to have of me. And then I think ultimately what it's about is about deciding how you want people to see you and then backing it and kind of being happy with it and sticking with it. So that's sort of probably the simple version for me.
Yeah, I think first of all, yes, you are correct that all good research should start with Wikipedia. Whether it should end with Wikipedia, whether you should continue to consult a variety of other sources, is something that I'll leave for people to debate amongst themselves. But I think that piece around it's defined as the perception of you based on your skills, experience, values, etc., etc. And I think the key takeaway there was as we set it up by saying, you're going to have a personal brand, whether you like it or not. People are going to perceive you in a certain way. You're going to be defined in the eyes of others. So you're better off to define it and cultivate it yourself in order to consciously and with intentionality be perceived in a certain way, rather than just kind of wander into a space where other people are making it up for you. Anybody else on the panel got anything they want to contribute to the subject of definition of personal brand and why it's important?
If I may, Sonia, Joel, I think what's interesting about that definition and the reality of that, it forces, I think, a really interesting question, which is a simple question, but maybe a difficult one to answer, which is, who am I? You know, I think as simple and as intuitive as that question might sound, I think for a lot of us, myself included, it's quite loaded and very deep. And it requires a level of introspection and reflection that I would encourage all of us to spend some time sitting with, because you know, I think the success or lack thereof in building and cultivating your image, and we'll talk about this later on in the discussion, I'm sure. I think the prerequisite of that is understanding who you are, so you can bring your full and most authentic self to the fore, and then with that understanding comes a recognition about how I then want to portray that, what value systems I want to bring to the table. Are my actions congruent with the person that I want people to recognize when I walk in the room? So I think spending some time and really asking the question, what kind of person am I? And also asking colleagues and others around you, how am I perceived? Because there may be differences. Those, you know, I might think I am this kind of person, I am perceived this way, but when I ask the question, the answer I get back could maybe not be congruent. And then the question becomes, how do I close that gap, if indeed there is one?
Or it might be that they see you in a better light than you see yourself. You know,
Absolutely.
Like sometimes if you just don't have the confidence to see yourself in that way, but then you ask around and people are like, no, you're brilliant at this, that, and the other. Like it's a great.
Yeah, just to say, I get that all the time, Sonia. But no, but I was going to put on a serious note, but Kenyatta, both of your points, I do think that bit around knowing oneself is absolutely the most fundamental part in trying to build a brand. Because if you don't own that, and I speak from experience because I spent many years trying to be someone else, right? So when I was in Barclays, a very corporate, very blue-blooded, a lot of people went to certain schools, belong to certain shires. And because I started at the beginning, having worked in Africa and had a great skill set, when I joined, that's what got me in, because I really knew my craft, probably knew more than most of the people of my age when I joined, because they'd all come from the grad program, etc. But I tried to fit into that culture, and that question around who am I didn't ask it. I was trying to think, what is it around here and how do I assimilate? And I think that's a dangerous place to be, because when you're assimilating in a culture and you don't know or identified who you are, you stop your superpower from emerging. And that superpower allows you to be confident and allow you to fly. So I think, you know, just your point around who am I is probably the most fundamental question in trying to build your personal brand, because you need to own you first. And then you can start to build out, you know, how competitive is that brand? How different is that from your peers? How relevant is that to the people that you're trying to engage with? But it absolutely starts with you and owning you. And I think for young people, it takes a while to, I'm saying that like, that sounds a bit condescending. I don't mean that. Maybe it's because I feel really old. Oh, I just speak to my younger self. I wasn't as confident around owning me, but I'm damn sure I am now that I'm an old man.
And from one old man to another, if you had your time again, forgive me for now veering off into an artificial scenario with you, but would you either behave differently or just not join an organization like Barclays where there may be an expectation for you to behave differently? or something completely different, of course. Don't have to stick to the two options I've provided.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a very interesting question. And first of all, I don't want to be disparaging about Barclays. When I was there, it was like the Man United of marketing. I learned so much. Oh, obviously, Man United is not the team now, but in those days,
Really
Barclays was a treble winning organisation in all sorts of ways, and I learned heaps. But your question around what would I have done differently? I think if I'd owned myself and answered the question that Kenyatta raised, I think I would have delivered an even stronger performance at Barclays. So I described my period there as the good, not so good, and the great. So as I explained, I got there very confident, straight out of Ghana, lots of experience, hit the ground running. In the middle years, it was a bit lumpy for me. And I suppose when I started to understand myself, I got a very good mentor who was the CEO of the retail bank, sort of instilled in me the confidence, got me thinking about who I was, and that allowed me to then perform better. So to put your question around what I've done differently, I would have tried to own who I am earlier. And I encourage everybody to own who they are earlier, because then they will perform better earlier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Otherwise, it takes so much energy trying to be someone else.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And actually, Kenyatta, I'm gonna direct this question to you, because you and I have known each other a long time now. And one of the many things that I've always liked about you is that you are who you are. There's an overused expression about or overused term in the professional world today about authenticity, but I view you as an authentic guy. So as part of this principle of facing into that question of who am I, what advice would you give to people about how to make sure their personal brand actually genuinely represents who they are?
It's a great discussion and really good question, Joel. I think for me, and for all the people who are on the call, one of the things that I think we should reflect on is this idea that there is a typical or archetypal leader, but there is a way to lead. There is a leadership style that is right, best, and I think that's just nonsense. It doesn't exist. There is no leadership archetype. And in fact, for me, my view is that leadership at its core is fundamentally three things. It's situational, it's non-hierarchical, and it's authentic. Leadership style changes depending on what's happening, as our behavior changes in life, frankly. Anyone can exhibit qualities of leadership. You can be a manager, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're a leader of people or a leader of thinking. And you can have no one reporting into you and exhibit phenomenal leadership qualities. And above all else, I think leadership is when it's best, it's authentic. And what I mean by that is, to the points we made earlier, it is not trying to be anything other than the most original, adequate, and authentic version of the human it inhabits, right? So I think where people sometimes fall afoul in this journey is they're trying to sort out kind of the impact they want to have professionally, is sometimes we look at other individuals and we think, oh, if I was only more like this, or if I did things more like that, or if I exhibited this kind of behavior, if I was a bit more extroverted, or if I talked a little bit less and was a bit more introverted, or if I was a bit more data-driven. And look, and I'm not suggesting for a second that those kinds of reflections aren't important. They are. But I think at the end of the day, if you try to be or try to lead in a way that is anything other than who you are genuinely, you set yourself up for failure. And so for me, I think understanding that there isn't a typical leadership archetype and allowing yourself to slide into that space in a way that works for you is really important. Also, what I will say is people will notice that. Like they say, bees, dogs, and children can kind of sniff out fear, right? I think that people understand when people are not being authentic. They can sense it when you're being disingenuous, right? So I think it behooves us all to exist in a space where we're relatively comfortable in our own skin and doing and behaving in ways that are congruent with our value systems. Anything else will get found out.
I think you make an excellent point. I mean, leadership is a subject that absolutely fascinates me, and I think there's a huge number of misconceptions pertaining to, right? One of the most common of which is that actually the more people you've led, the better the leader you are. It's a natural conclusion an awful lot of people reach. You think in order to be able to lead this number of people in this job, you've got to have led a X number of people in another job, and it's just fundamentally not true. There are people who we've all worked with, who we shan't name, given this is being recorded, who are, have very large scale leadership positions, hold executive titles. Doesn't make them a good leader of people. The other thing that that I've observed in leadership is that there are so many different personality types amongst people who make great leaders. I've worked with people who are incredibly shy, painfully so, introverted, but actually are brilliant leaders. What tends to be the consistent theme that runs through all of those people tends to be adaptability and pragmatism. So being able to adapt and adjust to the environment and the situation that you're facing into. It tends to be a sense of humanity as well. So, actually understanding that people are human and have feelings. And it's also a willingness. There's a whole bunch of things I'm forgetting here, but for the sake of getting to salient points, there's a willingness to be vulnerable. Vulnerability can be a superpower. Part of authenticity is being prepared to show your humanity. Is being prepared to say, I don't have all the answers. I don't necessarily know what to do. I'm not ready to make a decision about X, Y, or Z right here, right now.
Yes. And
through all the work I've done on the subject of leadership, authenticity tends to be the thing that people relate to most. People relate to somebody, they're more likely to want to go above and beyond and achieve things.
Absolutely.
Anything else that anyone else would share before we move on to the next subject? Any of our other kind panelists on the subject of ensuring that your personal brand represents who you really are?
Just a really quick one on that, on the point that you just made about humanity. I think part of it is vulnerability as well. And I loved what Adrian said about, like, you just got to be a bit humble about it and accept that you get it wrong sometimes. And actually, if you get it wrong in public, that's not a bad thing. Like, I think there's I think the reason I hate the concept of personal brand so much is just, it feels like it's really polished and it feels like it's this really, like, sort of manicured version of yourself. But I think, like, the leaders that have inspired me the most are the ones that show vulnerability, show a lot of humanity, and will just open up to when they've got it wrong. But like, to Adrian's point, like, totally, like, they're themselves in that, and they do that in a way that because if you're yourself and then you admit to failure or you say you screwed up, then nobody's really going to hate you for it, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a great bit of advice that I was given a long time ago is, be yourself and be comfortable with all that represents. And the one thing I would say before we move on to the next subject is a good exercise in actually taking some time out to work out what is important to me, what matters to me, what do I stand for, what are my own personal values and belief systems, how do I view the world, what are the things, where are the areas that I am prepared to compromise, because if you don't compromise in any aspect of your life, you're going to end up probably quite lonely. But but what are the things that are non-negotiable for me? Where's the line in the sand that I refuse to either let anybody else cross or refuse to cross myself? Omar, what practical tips can you share based on your lived experiences as to how to go about building and evolving your own personal brand?
I'll say for the record, I'm the same as Sonia. When someone says to me, "What's your personal brand?" I get a kind of an awkward feeling. I'm like, I don't like that. Someone said it to me ages ago in my career at Sony. He was like, Omar, what's your personal brand? What's your PR story? And I didn't like the question. I've never liked it. Doing the research for this and listening to Kenyatta and Adrian and Sonia speak, like I realized it's not what you first think it is. It's not about like, oh, how do I stand out? How do I like in a pool of people in an interview, how am I the one that people remember? I think it's the cheat code to figuring out how you have more impact. It's how you figure out how to be great at what you do. It's not necessarily about advertising yourself to employers or clients or whatever it might be. So I guess my first thing would just be like, change your mindset, change the way you think about a personal brand. And it really is about, if you can figure it out, if you can figure out what you're good at, you will figure out how to do better and how to have more impact. Three just real quick things. Like first one, for most people on this call, you're going to fit into this box. You already have a personal brand, whether you want it or not. You will walk into an interview, you'll walk into a meeting room, and you're not the studious one, or you're not the accountant or the numbers person. You're the black person, or you're the female. You will be typecast. For a lot of the 70 odd people that are on this call, you'll be typecast as soon as you walk in a room. That's another reason why it's really important to own your personal brand, because you need to define what you're good at, and you need to make sure the person on the other side of the table knows what you're good at, what you're passionate about, what value you bring, before they come to their own assumptions. And I'll give you just a real world example of it. I was at a company like super early in my career and had to present financial numbers for the first time. And so I stood up in front of probably a couple hundred people and was presenting numbers for the forthcoming year in the business. And the Italian team in the corner started laughing. Before I'd even said a word, I got up, put on my PowerPoint, they started laughing. They nudged each other and it went to the French team and they started laughing and it spread around the room. And I'm really nervous to be presenting in front of this room of a couple hundred people. And before I know it, the whole room's laughing. And so I'm like, sorry, what's the problem? Have I forgotten something? And somebody just says, who let the rapper into the room? And then there's a whole load of people laughing. They're like, who let 50 Cent come and present financial numbers? And it's that kind of stereotype is why you have to know you when you step into a room. I think it's really important. A hot tip, by the way, there's a book called Strength Finder. Don't know if anybody's read it. It's £10 on Amazon. Like, just buy it. There's a code in the back, fill in a survey. It tells you the 5 things that you are phenomenal at. Damiola knows it, right? Jacqueline hopefully knows the book. Honestly, it helps so much. It's really easy to say know what you're good at. It's really hard to actually figure out what you're good at and what you love doing. And just for me personally, Strength Finder was super helpful. So that's one. I'll be really quick. The second one is imposter syndrome. There are probably everybody on the call, I can't see their cameras, but they're probably all nodding going, yeah, bloody imposter syndrome. Like, we all get it. I think every CEO gets imposter syndrome. And when it happens, Adrian said something similar earlier. When it happens, that is when you're probably not at your best. That's when you're probably not living up to your personal brand, because you're more worried about whether you're showing up right, whether you understand the task that you've been given in front of you. I would honestly say like that, if you can figure out how to master and embrace imposter syndrome, like that's a superpower. Like the reason you're feeling imposter syndrome is because you're doing something new and you're learning. I get it sitting on a call with these 3 guys, right? Like, I'm not sure I'm qualified to actually be here. But with imposter syndrome, just embrace it. You're learning something new. You'll add it to your list. It will become another part of your personal brand, or it could become another part of your personal brand. And then, yeah, I won't, last practical tip, I won't dwell on it because I think Adrian covered it much more particularly than I can. But I just think there's something about not conforming. Don't assimilate. Like Adrian, I wasted 8 years at Sony trying to be what everybody else around me was. From the clothes I wear to the way I spoke to the way like everything I did, I was trying to be like somebody from Weybridge in Surrey who works in FMCG and consumer electronics. And it just wasn't me. And it took a really strong mentor, a guy called Roy Dickens, who was the only other person of color at Sony, to pull me aside and just be like, hey, is this really you? Is this really what you do? And the minute I figured that out, like everything changed for me. So yeah, I agree with everything Adrian said earlier. So those would be my three top tips. Like, you got a brand already, but own it.
Yeah.
Don't conform, and yeah, own imposter syndrome.
I think there's brilliant advice in there. There's a few things that you said that I've written down and probably will pass off as my own original thoughts at some point. Consultants do.
I got them all from Wikipedia. It's all good.
But yeah, the defining your personal brand, and I think by the way your your description of it as not this kind of fluffily cultivated, Instagram version of you, but actually a definition of who you are. Defining it as the cheat code to figuring out how you have the most impact. I mean, that's beautiful stuff. Imposter syndrome, I promise you, I have had the privilege of consulting with some of the largest organizations around at the very most senior level, and you're ever so slightly wrong about everybody experiencing imposter syndrome. There are some people who don't. They are psychopaths. They're generally the CEOs of most major organizations. But do embrace it, because you're right. It's generally you pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And one of the best bits of advice anybody ever gave to me was push yourself out of the comfort zone, because by doing so, you expand your comfort zone. And just
absolutely
keep pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. Anytime you feel like you're getting overly comfortable in your career, take on a new challenge, find something new to apply your skills and brain power to, because that's how you keep on growing and keep on evolving and remain challenged. Embrace the imposter syndrome. But that piece around don't conform is, I think, an unbelievably powerful message. Can we just go back to that moment in time where you're in the room with, I mean, how do you handle that?
It's one of those moments where you look back and you wish you'd had the right thing to say, like something really smart that put everybody back on their heels. I didn't. The way I handled it was, once it died down and I got on my presentation, I tried to absolutely nail the presentation. Like I wanted people to know that I knew more than was on those slides. And if they were going to ask me any question about any part of my business unit, I could answer it. That was how I personally dealt with it. Again, I wish I'd had something very smart and clever to say in response, but I didn't.
Okay, let's talk about aligning personal passions with your professional work. Adrian, I'm going to point this one over to you because I've spared you so far. I've got a two-part question. So you are, as everybody's already witnessed, and the reason that we asked you to come and be part of this, a very passionate guy. It's actually really quite inspirational. I'm not sure I've ever told you that. But first part of my question is, how do you go about aligning your personal interest with your professional work, so your personal passions and professional work? And the second part of my question is then how do you build a network and cultivate that network to support and elevate you?
Good question. So the passion piece and interest aligned for me, I suppose, when in 2015, I decided to kind of leave the safety net of Eurostar and jump out and do a startup. And I guess the background to that was two things. So I think I explained my route into marketing and some of my journey. When I eventually started to become a bit senior in the industry, and I started getting invited to the Marketing Society and the Oyster Catchers and all of these, ISBAR and all these things, it's when I started to see the top of the industry. And when I looked at the top of the industry, I saw no one that really looked like me. And that's when I realized that actually there was a job to be done. There was a job to kind of think about how you can, from an inclusion and diversity perspective. So I ended up doing two things. I set up this thing called, at that time, BAME 2020, which we've now rebranded No Turning Back 2020. And that was about trying to increase awareness and understanding around the creative industry for young people so that they know that this industry exists. And then I set up Brands with Values, because I knew that there was a job to think about how you can help organizations deliver change in ways that are more meaningful and sustainable. And when I look at inclusion and diversity, I think it is a change program, just like digital transformation, just like sustainability. It just happens to be the most emotionally charged culture change program there is in the world right now. But for me, it's about understanding the ecosystem within which people work and to find ways to call out and to measure how inclusive or toxic it is, and to give direction on how to move it on so that it can create an organization where people can feel like they can bring themselves to work and deliver greater discretionary effort, which leads to productivity and all of that. So the reason why that whole big ramble is your bit around passion and interest. Well, I just went for it. So I had a career of my own trying to move up the greasy pole. And in 2015, I left and I set up these two things. And it was tough. So I was literally free falling. I was literally had this passion, had this desire, free falling, not wondering how hard I'm going to hit the floor, trying to get these things off the ground. And it was tough on the family, tough on me, tough on all areas. But you just, by sort of keeping the faith, pushing, we was able to eventually start to see traction on both No Turning Back and the business that we run. So when I talk about passion, interests, and how do you use those to grow your network, I created these things, and those things are now being used to build my network. So what do I mean by that? I mean, on BAME 2020, or now No Turning Back, we've got a massive advisory board of the good and the great. We're all part of our network doing reverse mentoring with our ambassadors. I've got ambassadors in loads of different companies that go out and talk to young kids in university around the industry. And I also work with boards in big organizations who are serious around leaning into inclusion and diversity in a different way. So as opposed to the training, the education, the unconscious bias training and all of that stuff that creates beautiful optics, because you can tell people that we're doing these things, we actually work with people to forensically understand the ecosystem with which you're trying to create an inclusive culture, which is why I'm saying we're kind of disrupting the market. But that allows us to hold organizations to account. So when they are doing these things, like getting someone in for Black History Month or sending tweets up because of George Floyd, we're actually in the background measuring their culture today, showing how inclusive it is or isn't, and holding them to account as they drive interventions to ensure that change happens in a systemic and meaningful way. So the summary for me is, I suppose the learn is, I've decided to create it to build my own network. So there's that way. The other way that I was doing it prior to this moment of madness in 2015 would be to be a marketeer, to join the CIM, to join the Marketing Society and just try and talk to your network that way. But I suppose the point is, don't feel like you need to be restricted. You can be in an industry, you can look for the associations, you can reach out and join them and build your network that way, but don't be afraid to create something, because things come from things. So you start things small and you build, you refine, you build, you pray, you keep the faith, and you just have to believe that, even if you are free falling, it gets a bit corny, but you have to believe your parachute will open.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my view on it. And we continue to grow and we continue to face fear every day. And so it goes on. And you end up being on panels like this and with a great young audience who I hope are enjoying listening to some of the things that we're saying.
Well, the indication is that the numbers have held steady. I was at an event in the audience the other day where literally I felt awful for the panelists because the numbers you could just see dwindling. So at least we've either got an engaged audience or we've got a very polite audience. But either way, it's a positive. I mean, networking is a fascinating concept because it's something that it's a bit like the visceral allergic reaction that Omar and Sonia have to this term personal brand. I have a similar reaction when people talk about networking. It feels like you should be in a room with people you don't know, going up and introducing yourself and handing out a business card, feeling like, a bit of a fool. The reality of it is, somebody gave me a bit of advice a long time ago, which I hold true to this day. And the most powerful way to build your network, in my humble professional opinion, is concern yourself with what you can give before you worry about what it is you can receive. And if actually you're perceived, and I suppose this links beautifully into the whole subject of designing your brand, if you can concern yourself with how much value can I add?
Yes.
How much benefit can I deliver for other people, it's amazing how prepared people will be to do things back for you in return, often without you asking.
That's a beautifully articulated point, Joel. I give an example in industry. For those of you guys familiar with or close to startup Silicon Valley investment, one of the things that folks used to look at when they ask themselves, is this particular business worth investing in, say an app, for example. You look at downloads. Well, downloads isn't representative of active users and utility. And utility, or a measure of utility, in many instances can be the difference maker with respect to, is a person going to invest in this business? Because it's an indicator, it's demonstrative of how much value the thing that you created are you creating for the people who use that service, that tool, that product. And if we think of ourselves in the context of value creation, I think that can be incredibly powerful. What kind of utility am I creating for my network, my organization, every walk of life, really, my friends, my family, because as your utility increases, so will your value. So I think that's a really, really great point. There's a model that I got taught a long time ago about using performance, image, and exposure. It's called PIE, P-I-E. So the P stands for performance, the I, image, and the E is exposure. And the exposure bit talks about effectively what Joe just mentioned, who knows you, but not just who knows you and knows your work and what you're good at. Because if they know that, then they probably care a bit more because of the value that you bring. And what's interesting, I think in the context of this particular group, I don't know about you guys, but I'll share an anecdote. When I was a kid, my parents used to say to me, look, if you want half of what your peer group has, you're going to have to work twice as hard, right? So I don't know if that may be an African-American anecdote in the States, but that was quite common amongst my peer group growing up. As an African-American, I got told, look, you're going to have to work doubly hard to get what you deserve. What that does, and I was reflecting on this as I was thinking about this session, is it caused me very early on in my career to overinvest in the P of PIE. I overinvested in performance. But what you learn is that performance is table stakes. Everybody performs, everybody does well. And the reality is, if you want to progress in your career, performance is probably 10, 20% of the picture. The image and the exposure piece account for much more. But because I was given that point of view and it stuck with me, I overinvested in that piece for quite a long time. And it caused two things to be true. One, I spent way too much time not understanding who I was to the comments that have been made earlier. So my image, who am I? What are people saying about me when I'm not in the room? Because I thought, well, as long as I perform well, that should take care of itself. The reality is sometimes it doesn't. And the other piece is I didn't put myself out there enough with respect to helping people to understand the usefulness and utility that I brought to the business or to the organization. So one of the things I would say to you guys in terms of why networking is so critically important is because as you matriculate through an organization, the difference maker around performance will become less and less adequate. It won't be enough because everyone around you will be performing brilliantly. So the question then becomes, who knows you, who knows what you're capable of, who cares about you, your performance, and your ultimately your career, and reaching out, building networks, being fearless, knowing who you are, become critically important in that context, I think.
I think that's a really valuable point. Let's move on to some questions. The first of our questions is from Bianca, who says, could anyone, so I'll let one of you guys pick this up, describe their own personal brand and maybe just one thing you've done to cultivate it? And she goes on to say, I'd just like to get a bit more of a concrete idea as to what we're talking about, which I think is a really great question. Anyone fancy that? I mean, Sonia, it's got to be you, surely, given your deep affection for the concept of personal brand.
I literally haven't got anything serious to say, but I remember when after I'd accepted this job, I was really bricking it about the fact that it's quite a corporate environment and I'm not a corporate person. And I said to my new boss, I was like, I'm a little bit worried because I smoke, I swear, and I wear trainers to work. Like, how's that going to work out for me? And I suppose that's my personal brand. I smoke, I swear, I wear trainers to work. That's the best I can do right now for the cuff.
I like it. Someone who knows what they stand for. Ken, were you gonna say something?
Well, I was just gonna say, I use this a lot. I talk about myself in the context of a person who is authentic, and we talked about this when you mentioned me, Joel. I am, if nothing else, 100% Kenyatta Nelson every single time you run into me, right? So I spent a long time in my life trying to assimilate. And at some point I gave up on that. And I said, look, I'm just going to be authentically who I am. And for me, authenticity is a part of my, or if you want to call it, personal brand. The other piece for me is, and I mentioned this earlier, is, and I also use this language a lot, I consider myself more an anthropologist than a marketer. So when people meet me or I talk about my skill set or I talk about why I'm passionate about this particular profession, it's because genuinely I view marketing as a social science. Why I love it is because it's an opportunity to better understand why people do the things that they do, including all of us. And we get to have a bit of fun trying to manipulate some of that behavior, which frankly, I love the idea of. And so that for me, those two things, kind of authenticity and my deeply curious passion around human beings and why we do the funny, quirky things we do, those are the things that kind of define me.
I could, from a slightly different angle, I can tell you how I would check what my personal brand is and whether there is a personal brand. Go ask 10 people that you know well or that you know in a professional capacity.
Absolutely.
And ask them to tell you what they, when they say your name, what comes to mind. And I would hope that if any of you went and asked my old team at Uber or my old team at Sonos or my current team at Amazon, that you should, even over that, whatever that is, 8 years, 7-year period, you should get really consistent answers on like, oh, Omar does this. He enjoys this. He's good at this. He's kind of terrible at this thing over here, but he knows it. I would hope you get really consistent answers about what I value and what I bring. If you do, that's my personal brand.
Very good. We've got a question from Jane, who's asking if we've got any advice on how to rebuild your brand when moving careers. And I think that's a great question. Moving careers is something I know a little bit about, given my profession. I've facilitated a few career moves over the last 20 years for people. And I suppose my interpretation of the question, Jane, and I can't hear you, so I hope I haven't got this entirely wrong, is effectively how do you build a brand in a new environment rather than how do you completely reinvent yourself when you're starting off, because everything should be anchored in an authentic version of you. And the first question that you should ask yourself when you start in any new environment is, how do I want to be perceived? What do I want people to remember me for? What do I want people to think of me? And but that should be rooted in an authentic representation of who you really are, what you really believe. And if it doesn't suit everybody, that's okay. This message of non-conformity is a really important one, and I think it's something that often it takes a little while in life. I think that's not meant to be patronizing in any way at all, but for people to realize that who you are is okay as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else. Being who you are is a great thing. Celebrate it, and if that's different, that's great. That's no issue whatsoever. But I think the advice that I would give is going into a new environment, just give it some thought in advance, and following the exercise that Omar suggested, which is ask other people, because also what you'll realize is that perception is reality. How other people perceive you will be because of how your characteristics manifest to others. We've got a question here from Evan. Oh, yeah, please do, Sonia, go for it.
Just really quickly, I think what it does allow you to do when you change careers, or you just even go within the same kind of field into another role, is be a bit braver with your personal brand every time. So like I'm gay, but I wasn't out at work in a job like way back, and every time I go and start somewhere new, I feel a little bit more emboldened about like bringing a bit more of myself, or just being a little bit more punchy about what I think, what I think I bring to it. And I think a fresh start gives you that, like, of course, absolutely. And I really believe in everything that Kenya said at the beginning about, like, it's sort of, work out what you are first, because that doesn't change. The fundamentals of it doesn't change, but it does allow you to, if you're going for a move, it does allow you to think, okay, do I feel a bit stronger to be the next version? Just add a couple of dimensions maybe.
Yeah, very good. It's a lovely question from Evelyn, which is any advice for introverts on raising their image and exposure when they're inclined to be happy working in the background rather than up front? It's a lovely question. And
well, I'm sure that guy, what was he? I think he passed away now. I've forgotten. He's created that amazing brand all about culture. He was an introvert. I think he was an Asian dude, US, massive success story.
Literally no idea who you're talking about. I'm sorry.
Anyway, he wasn't, it's going to come. I'll find it before the end of the talk. Everyone used to talk about it. He famously would hire people, and in the first 3 months, if they didn't, he offered them a month's salary not to take the job.
Is this the shoe brand, Zappos?
Yes.
Yeah, Zappos, bought by Amazon, I believe, Omar.
There you go. So that's the person I'm talking about. And see, he said he was an introvert, but what he used to do, he used to surround himself around extroverts to help deliver on his leadership agenda. So he would mastermind and obviously understand, very clever, brilliant guy, but he would work with these people around him to help deliver his agenda. And that will allow him to connect and with his company's employees. And obviously they were very successful as a result.
I think there's a connected to that point, actually, in terms of how, as an introvert, you might drive image and exposure. And I don't think, to be fair, this advice is exclusive. I think it could work for anyone. I think one of the things you might look to do is look for people who can champion you, whether that's in the context of mentorship or in the context of people who, because they work with you, recognize your work, recognize the quality of your work. And I think one of the things that people in career and frankly in life do far too little of is ask for help. I think whether it's because we just kind of, we've become high flyers and very successful, we just don't want to ask anyone to help us with anything. And in my life, I've found that generally speaking, when you ask someone to help you with something, it's rare that you get a no. People like to feel needed. It's kind of hardwired in our DNA. We like to feel useful, right? So reach out to other people and ask them to champion you. And even if that looks like making sure you and your work are made more visible, because they help to lift your presence and your provenance, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be you putting yourself out there. Others can help you do that for you and champion you as an individual, as a professional, your work and the quality of your work. And interestingly, I think that can be, in some instances, much more helpful and much more successful, because effectively you have a credential. It's a bit like if I walk up to a person in a bar and say, I'm great. Well, that's not going to go over as well as is if that person's friend says Kenyatta is great, right? So there's an element of this, which is, can we utilize our network? Can we reach out to people and say, hey, look, I'm looking to be a bit more visible in the organization. Can you help me with this?
Yeah.
I would also say like that, don't be discouraged. It's easy for me to say because I am an extrovert and I know I am, but someone said to me once that there are kites and there are strings, and they were like, Omar, you're a kite. Like you're the one who wants to be flying up here doing all this fun stuff, but without a string to ground you and keep you down to earth, you're nothing. And it was the
or you're just all over the place.
Tony. Yeah, I'm just all over the place, flapping in the wind, honestly, making a load of noise and achieving very little. And I know now, like I've learned, I need strings in my teams to like keep me grounded, keep me down to earth. And I would just say, I forget who asked the question, sorry, but don't be discouraged, because there are plenty of companies that value the string more than they value the kite. And this is not an ad for Amazon, but Amazon is one of those companies. And there are plenty of others like it. Part of it is when you are interviewing, when you are looking at next roles, like be really clear about what you want, be really clear that you're the string and you're integral, and find a company that really values that.
Yeah. Yeah. Go where you're celebrated.
Yeah.
Not tolerated.
Yeah, 100%.
No kite can fly safely without a string, right?
I tried for a few years, but no, you can't. You can't.
And Evelyn, you'll be pleased to know that in numerous studies about what makes for the most successful leaders, people who are on the introvert side of the introversion extroversion spectrum come out as better leaders of people.
Yeah.
So, guys, I'm really conscious of time. There's one question we've got to get in from Jess, though, which I think is a wonderful one, which is, what would you say are the differences, the key differences between marketing or rather branding yourself, as in your personal brand, and marketing yourself?
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Does this come into your pie model here, Kenyatta?
I think it's Kenyatta's pie model, right? Because the exposure thing, I think, is quite interesting. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, I think the difference between marketing yourself and branding yourself. So I think fundamentally, your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? That's what your brand is. Now we can be intentional about that. We can cultivate it. We can build it over time. But ultimately, it is not fully owned by you, right? It's in many ways, and maybe in most ways, it is defined by the people who you engage with, interact with, work with, are surrounded by. Marketing is me telling people what I want them to do. So the biggest difference in my mind is I can market, but if my behavior and value systems are not congruent with the story that I tell, then my brand will not hold up, right? So if I to use a real life example, if I'm making this up, if I build cars and I go out and tell everyone my cars are the safest cars on the road, but then every 2 or 3 months, I've got wheels and tires falling off, airbags don't deploy, and all sorts of craziness is happening. Well, my brand will not be congruent with the marketing that I've told people. So I think as we think about this in the context of ourselves, that's the piece we have to be mindful of. We should be, and we can be intentional about the story we want to tell and the brand we want to create. But we have to be, our words and actions need to be congruent. And this is why authenticity and knowing who you are becomes critically important. Because if you don't understand that, then you're going to get found out. You're saying one thing, but the reality of who you are will show through. And that lack of congruence will lead to confusion. Who is this person? I don't trust them. There's a great model in HR called the familiarity FCT model: familiarity, comfort, and trust. And those who people were familiar with, we're comfortable with, and we trust, with the T being the most important part, tend to be those who travel up the pyramid in terms of being promoted. well, if what you say and the way you behave isn't congruent, I can't trust you. And if I can't trust you, there's no way you're moving to the top of an organization. And so that, for me, that's the difference.
I think that's a beautiful summary. I mean, to me, I'd sum it up as simply as when it comes to the personal brand versus the marketing of that brand, brand equates to the product, the proposition, you know, who you are. The marketing equates to the messaging. And to Kenyatta's point, if they're disconnected, it becomes see-through very, very quickly.
Very quickly, yeah.
And exposed. Guys, we have to leave it there because we're out of time, but it has been brilliant. Thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been massively beneficial. I'm going to remind everybody that it was all about this book in the first place. That's how we came together today. There are a few copies still available. Whilst it's completely sold out and you cannot buy it anywhere online, the BYP network, as a gift from Sky, still has a few copies left. So BYP members can receive a free copy. I think Jordan's just posted in the chat the link to follow. When you go and get your copy, not only do you get words of wisdom and insight from the greatest marketing people around, including some of the wonderful people on this panel, but also Sky will give $19.99 to NHS charities together on your behalf. And that goes to supporting the amazing healthcare professionals that have done so much for us all over the past 15 months. Omar, Sonia, Kenyatta, Adrian, thank you. It was brilliant.
Thank you.